Hey guys, Sidewinder here, back for some more tutorial videos, and today's video is just going to be some mechanics regarding force fields, which I'm pretty sure that I haven't done before. I know I did it once, but then lost the video. So yeah, I'm going to be doing a force field video here. I want to show you guys basic mechanics of force fields, just so that you kind of understand how you're supposed to be using them, and show you how they're useful. So the first thing I really want to get to is controlling force fields as a whole. Now, as you might know, holding shift will give your units commands so that they will execute certain commands in order, but you do not want to use this shift key when using force fields, because if you attack move somewhere, like if you attack move here and then tell it to force field as you hold shift, they're going to walk to that point first and then lay down all the force fields. So it's kind of counterintuitive unless you control it absolutely perfectly. So that's not what I would do. Most people just get used to pressing the force field hotkey, which for me is Z. On standard, I think it's F, but I play on grid. And you can check all of your hotkeys just by going to the options menu, or rather, excuse me, going to the hotkeys menu and changing it in here. So get used to what hotkey your force fields are on so that you can use those effectively. And so if you just basically shift, or rather don't shift, but rather alternate the hotkey for it and just click on the map, it's a lot more kind of straightforward as far as placing them down. It's just one click, and then you can alternate really fast and do it really quickly if you're used to playing and clicking both buttons alternatively, so you can kind of lay them down fairly fast. Not really sure that that's the greatest force field placement, but you get the point. The idea here is to be fast with your force fields so that they're actually useful and keep your units alive or block other units out of the battle. Another thing you can do that a lot of people don't realize is you can actually just hold that key down. So if you hold it down, it'll just basically repeat so that it's always on there for you until you release it. But the bad thing about that is you'll have to like right click or hit escape or something to get off of that command. So there's a few ways you can do it. Most people just like to alternate clicks like that, and that's typically what I do. So yeah, that's just basically handling them. Just don't queue them up via shift, because most of the time it'll just place all your force fields after the battle, and that's a huge waste. So let's talk a little bit about placing proper force fields in concession. Now you can see when you hit the force field button, it'll show a little blob showing you where the force field's actually going to be placed before it's placed. And ideally you want to have no overlap on your force field so that it's literally as effective as possible and you're not wasting energy by duplicating force fields like this. That's just a waste of energy. You're using like 5 or 6 force fields when you really only need like 3. So yeah, a few different things that you need to learn about force fields. For the most part, as you get better at the game, force fields are going to become more and more important in the right circumstances. We're going to run through a few of the circumstances that you might see on the ladder and show you places where you can institute those effectively and fairly simply. The first situation, I should mention that you're usually not going to have this many sentries, so this is just so I don't run out of energy and can just spam force fields like crazy. But the most common situation you're going to come across is your own base's ramp. This is a little wider than most ramps, so I'm not sure how particularly well that's going to work, but the concept is still the same. Most of your ramp's force fields are going to be blocked by one force field. And this can do a couple of things. It can prevent units from actually running into your base. They'll just sit there and butt up against the force field. Or what you can do is wait until their army is halfway up the ramp and split them in half with the force field so that you're only fighting one half of the army at a time. That's obviously ideal, but you can see that if you were to back up, then the units down there can't really fire. They just kind of stand around. So you're fighting half of an army and then the other half of an army at the same time. So pretty straightforward stuff there. Obviously on these ramps you don't want to miss your force fields, because if you were to, let's say you're trying to hold off a bunch of Marines, if you were to place a force field instead of right in the middle of the ramp like I did, you can actually place it 1 hex off and the Marines will still be able to run up the ramp. They'll run up single file, and you can use a second force field if you really need to close it off. But there's some situations where it's really bad if you miss a force field like that, and they're able to just walk up and kill you. So just be very mindful of that. So sentries really don't have a ton of DPS. Their attacks do 6 space and their weapon speed is 1, so it's 6 DPS standard. It's about half that of a Marine, I would say. Depends on the Marine's firing speed. It's actually a little better than that. But the Marines can stim, so sentry DPS isn't all that great. It's best to combine it with other units in the Protoss arsenal. So let's say, for example, we have a bunch of Zealots here. But the problem with these Zealots is that without sentries, there's units like Marauders or units like Stalkers that can just endlessly kite them because either they have Marauder slow or because the Stalkers are just flat out faster than the Zealots themselves. So you're going to kind of use your force fields in conjunction with each other so that you're not just losing units for free. If this were just a straight up fight between these two, I'll show you what would normally happen if the Terran player was actually paying attention and controlling his units correctly. What's going to happen is your Zealots are never going to be able to catch up because the Marauders slow them down as they run. You can see they're doing a little bit of damage. These Marauders obviously don't have stim, but these Zealots are losing a lot of health for absolutely no damage, or basically very little damage. If they had stim, these Zealots would never get a shot off against good micro. But if the Marauders are trying to run away in a different situation where you actually have sentries backing them up, let me make a few more Zealots to even up this fight. So let's say you have this unit composition instead, or maybe even just a few less sentries. You don't need that many force fields, but if the Marauders try to kite now, what's going to happen is they're going to come up here, they're going to start firing, and you're going to go behind them so that they try to retreat, and they're like, ah, and they're taking all this damage while they're trying to retreat. Obviously your force fields can work against you, so if you get them in a tight pocket, it'll make it so it's a lot harder for them to walk away. As you can see right here, there's a whole bunch of different Marauders, all stacked on top of each other. But you get the point. The idea is that the Zealots won't catch certain units if those units are macroed properly, so you just kind of cut them off and prevent them from actually retreating through a place right here, so the Zealots kind of catch them in a little pocket and just slice them down. Same thing can be said for Stalkers, obviously. I don't think I really need to illustrate that point. In late game armies, you can mix in sentries along with things like Colossus, whereas the Colossus would just outright die otherwise. So let's get a more typical like Zerg army put together here, if you don't mind. Let's say it's Roaches. So you put out all these Roaches. Straight up, these Roaches could just walk up there and snipe Colossi, and you would lose a whole bunch of stuff. But if you cut off part of the Roaches like in the middle, then the Roaches are not nearly as effective. So let's go ahead and put out... Whoops, don't want those guys to attack. Let's go ahead and put out a few Colossus. We'll go ahead and research their range upgrade.
Research. Additional supply depots required.
It's probably a little much. We'll hold one back. Let's go ahead and put these up here. Let me research roach speed really quick, which is this.
Research complete.
So in the event that these were to straight up fight, you can see what's going to happen. These roaches will just walk up here. They'll snipe down Colossus easily. You can see they kill in about 2 hits. But there's a lot of different things that you can do to make it so that doesn't actually happen. So let's put out a couple more Colossus in the same situation. But we'll use force fields this time to make it so that the roaches really can't attack the Colossus, considering the Colossus base range is 9, and the roaches base range, as we can see here, is only 4. So if they were coming up to fight your Colossus, and let's just go ahead and put these on attack move. They are a little weak, but this will still demonstrate the point. If you go up here and just force field in front of the roaches, now these roaches are never going to be able to attack your Colossus. And you can continue to kind of put force fields together in conjunction with trying to retreat your Colossus a little bit, so that you're getting a lot better mileage out of these, rather than letting the roaches just walk up to you. You can see the point is just that if you keep the roaches away from you, or if you can separate the roaches so that not all the roaches are firing, you're going to be a lot better off in dealing with stuff like this. So Colossus plus force fields is really, really strong, especially if you can put them up like against a wall. So if you had that same army and you had a wall working with you, they would all run up there and you could easily just force field them all into a little pocket and let your Colossus just go to town. So a lot of different things you can do. The other different thing you can do is if you have a ton of sentries on the field and they have just a ton of Zerglings, you're going to lose that fight if it's a straight up fight. So we'll put those out as well and show you a way you can defensively force field yourself from like melee units. That's a lot of Zerglings, but if we go up to the spawning pool, research speed,
Research complete.
it's fairly normal for those Zerglings. If you're able to find good positions and like pin your sentries up against a wall, and all these Zerglings come running in here, and you just go... Oops, the Colossus are getting in on the fight. But if you just did that and were to set yourself in a little pocket like this, it'd just make it so the Zerglings would have to run away, and all your sentries wouldn't die. So you're retaining a ton of your sentries here rather than letting the Zerglings just come up here, surround them, and get a lot of stuff done. If you're really smart with your force field placement, you can do basically defensive force fields when they're right on top of you. And it'll help a little bit, but not as much as if you're able to just get them down in advance. So, let's say for example, you're like out in the middle of a field or something, and Zerglings come up here to surround you. Let me hotkey these sentries really quick. So I came to 4. So let's say Zerglings were come up to surround you. That would really suck, but you can kind of still get yourself out of the situation. See, I donutted all my, or at least a lot of my sentries in there, rather than letting them all die. So you can kind of do it okay if you just let them kind of force field right next to your sentries. It'll push other stuff out of the way, so your sentries can stay in there and live, rather than just getting completely eaten up by those Zerglings. So essentially just the force fields are there to kind of control space. There's a lot of different uses that you can have with them. They're obviously best combined with things like Colossus or with Zealots to prevent stuff from retreating. But there's a lot of different builds that you guys can run that really rely on force fields quite a bit. And if you're good at landing those force fields, then you're going to do a ton of damage. So just be creative with your terrain. Try to control ramps to prevent people from actually running up with their whole army. Try to plant defensive force fields if you think you really need to against like melee units like Zealots and Zerglings, or just try to split their army up if you are fighting in like an open field against roaches or something. So one last time, let me just put in a few Colossus here against just a ton of roaches. We'll force field them all off and make this a fun fight.
Ula Sadari, or Artanis.
Just kill these Zealots really quick. You can put out a few more units because it's a lot of Colossi. No, that's fair enough. It doesn't matter. Let's just do one last example and show you how if you have stuff behind the force field that can't fire, it really helps a lot of stuff out. So we'll just rush these roaches up. As you can see, rush these Colossi up. Look at how many roaches are in the back, unable to fire here. And you can kind of endlessly do this, and you can also pocket roaches in between your force fields like so, make it so that the Colossus can easily just splash all over them. A lot of different stuff you can do, so just know where and when to use your force fields. Try to trap stuff in the force fields like that so your splash can help them out. You can do the same thing with Storm, but I think you get the point by now, at least in terms of where to use force fields, how your mechanics should go. So if you have any questions about anything, I do main Protoss, so I should be able to give fairly good insight. The other thing that I probably should mention is that massive units, if you see it right down here, will crush force fields. So if you're trying to force field out a Colossus, it just won't work. Or if you're trying to force field underneath your own Colossus. So let's go ahead and lay down a force field. If you walk the Colossus over it, it will just crush it. And the same thing goes for things like Archons. They are massive. Thors are massive. Ultralisks are massive. So know what can crush force fields. And so if somebody's trying to contain you in your base or something, in fact, let me mention that as well. Let's put out a few stalkers here. Another common situation you might get yourself into is, let's say you're Terran, and you have to put out a whole bunch of units like this. If these two sides were to just straight up fight, then that would be really bad for the Protoss. They just don't have enough DPS to deal with all this stuff from the Terran player. They might, actually. But it really comes down to just force fielding. So if let's say this is the Terran base up here, and you're waiting outside their base, if they try to run down, then you can easily just block them off and force field. Whoops! Jeez, what is going on? Well, not place. I don't think I have vision there, that's why. But yeah, if they try to run down, then they're just going to keep losing units basically for free. So let's keep having them run down the ramp if they possibly can, and just keep chopping them up as they come down. So you can see all these Marauders in the back just can't fire, and they're losing a lot of units for free. I lost all my sentries because I'm being sloppy and explaining this at the same time, but you kind of get the point. Just control space with your force fields. Let me know if you have any questions that I didn't address in this video, and I'll see you guys next time.